Are you tired of playing games featuring the same old stereotypical fantasy characters, cybernetically enhanced mercenaries, and spandex-clad superheroes? Then step into the world of Strange Things Afoot, a world where almost everything on the internet is true. Strange Things Afoot is an upcoming tabletop role-playing game from Point of Insanity Game Studio. It draws inspiration from the world of creepypastas and urban legends. Players take the role of middle to high school age students as they struggle against supernatural entities that can only manifest on Earth if people believe in them. You can keep up to date with Strange Things Afoot by visiting poigamestudio.com, visiting our podcast at poigamestudio.podbean.com, following us on Twitter at poigamestudio, and by backing our Kickstarter on kickstarter.com.
I chose the movie Kwaidan, which is a Japanese movie from 1965. Nikki, have you seen it?
I don't know if I'm thinking of the same one, but...
Okay. So this was directed by Masaki Kobayashi. I'm going to try and say some Japanese words throughout this, so I really apologize to anybody if I butcher them. I really am not trying to be offensive. I'm, trying my hardest. So, this movie is an anthology film. It's consisting of 4 segments. Really, only one of them takes place in the winter, which is kind of how I snuck it in here. I just really want to talk about this movie, and couldn't really think of another time that I would be able to do it, so I got in on a technicality. So this movie is based on folktales by, I'm gonna kill this first name, Lafcadio Hearn, mostly from his book Kwaidan, Stories and Studies of Strange Things. So this guy was an expat who moved to Japan and just became totally immersed in Japanese culture and wrote all of these stories about, retelling Japanese folktales for a Western audience. And so this is how the West started to become more familiar with the myths and legends of Japan. So this movie won the special jury prize at the Cannes Film Festival and was nominated for an Oscar for Best Foreign Language Film. So it's important to remember when I'm talking about this and when you're watching it that the deeper meaning in the movie and in the segments is somewhat lost in translation. I mean, this is before international movies got or could get the big distribution that they get today. And so this was a Japanese movie based on Japanese folktales made for a Japanese audience. So the movie assumes that the audience has a basic knowledge of the meaning behind the stories and the meaning behind the legends that are featured in the movie. So the first segment is the black hair. In Japanese, that's kurokami. This one is about an impoverished swordsman who divorces his wife to marry a wealthy woman to improve his social status. However, the second marriage proves to be unhappy, and the swordsman soon regrets divorcing his first wife, who was more patient and devoted. His second wife is furious when she discovers that the swordsman not only married her for her money, but that he is still longing for his old life. The swordsman tells his wife's lady-in-waiting to inform his wife that the marriage is over and she should return to her parents in shame. The swordsman returns to his old house and finds it in disrepair. But once he gets there, he reconciles with his first wife, who tells him that he shouldn't punish himself for what he did, and she understands why he left, and basically there's nothing to forgive. I'm not angry with you at all, right? So the two sit up that night, and they happily discuss their future, until the swordsman finally falls asleep. He wakes up... Have you seen this movie?
No,
okay.
I was thinking of a different one.
Okay.
I think it was a Korean anthology movie.
Oh, there are a ton.
Yeah, yeah.
So anyway, so he wakes up the following day to discover that he has been sleeping next to his first wife's rotted corpse. So he begins rapidly aging, and he flees the house only to be attacked by his first wife's black hair. And that's how it ends.
Okay, I watched a video on this movie.
Yes,
so that's why it sounds so familiar.
Famous movie. Very famous. So the first segment seems kind of like a simple tale, but it does have deeper meaning in Japanese folk tales. So the Yuri, is a ghost held to the earth by their thoughts at the time of death or the manner of their death. Yuri don't have to be female, but the most common representation is a betrayed or abandoned woman who stays on Earth to seek vengeance. Kwaidan was the first film to show a Yuri as a white-faced woman with long dark hair, and this representation has of course now become standard, and you can see it in numerous, not only Japanese, but plenty of movies from other countries as well, like Ringu or The Grudge, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this kind of set the standard and started that representation and basically changed the face of Japanese horror forever. So the second segment is called The Woman of the Snow, and this is the winter one. It's also called, so in Japanese it's called Yuki-onna. So there are two woodcutters named Minokichi and Mosaku. And there's a big winter storm, so they take refuge in a fisherman's hut. Mosaku is lured out of the hut by a female spirit called a Yuki-onna, but she spares Minokichi because he's very young. The Yuki-onna warns him to never mention what happened or she will come back and kill him. So Minokichi, sometime later, it's like a few years later, he's totally forgotten what happened, basically, right? He sort of like blocked it out because it was so traumatic. So he meets a woman named Yuki who's on her way to Edo to secure a job as a lady-in-waiting. Minokichi offers to let her stay the night at his house with his mother. The mother takes a liking to her and asks her to stay. Yuki never ends up leaving for Edo, and she and Minokichi fall in love and marry, and have 3 children. One night, there's a huge snowstorm, and Minokichi remembers what happened. And so he tells his wife about the encounter that he had with the Yuki-onna, which of course leads to his wife revealing that she is the Yuki-onna. She has basically come back, or she encountered him on purpose to make sure that he was not telling anybody what had happened. She was basically just waiting for him to slip up. However, despite the fact that he broke his word, she refrains from killing him due to the children they share. Yuki then leaves Minokichi with their children and tells him if he ever mistreats them, she will return, and this time she will kill him. She disappears into the snowstorm, leaving Minokichi alone and heartbroken. So the Yuki-onnas are extremely famous in Japanese folklore. They are said to appear on snowy nights as a tall woman with long black hair and blue lips. Her skin is so pale that it's translucent, which makes her blend into the snow. So despite her inhuman body, her eyes are said to strike terror in mortals. The Woman of the Snow has an especially heavy focus on its character's eyes. There are a lot of close-ups of eyes. There is one scene where blended into the background, you can see a giant eye in the sky watching him. This is right before he encounters his wife, his future wife. And then in addition, Yuki is the Japanese word for snow. So Japanese viewers would have immediately known that his wife was the spirit.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so they would have been able to see it was coming, but like us Americans and other people who don't speak Japanese would not have seen it coming. So the third segment of the movie is probably the most famous, at least visually. It's called Hochi the Earless. So in Japanese, that's Mimi Nashi Hochi no Hanashi. So Hochi is a blind musician. Yeah, I feel like I just killed that. I'm sorry, guys.
We've been doing a lot of tough words. Like we've been doing a lot of foreign languages lately.
I know. So Hochi is a blind musician whose specialty is singing the tale of the Heike about the Battle of Dan-no-Ura, fought between the Taira and Minamoto clans during the end of the Gaipei War. So again, just as a little, like, insert here, obviously none of those words mean anything to me, right? But they absolutely meant something to the Japanese audience. So when he's singing the song in the beginning of this segment, they do like a very stylized reenactment of this battle. And to the Japanese viewers, they would have immediately known what this battle was. This is a very famous battle. And this is a real song. You know, they didn't make this up for the movie. This is a real ancient Japanese ballad. So Hochi disappears every night, which baffles his friends and the temple priests. So one night his friends decide to follow him, only to discover that Hochi has been going to the graveyard to recite the tale of the Heike to the court of the dead emperor from the story. So they go back and they tell the priests at the Buddhist temple, and they are very concerned for Hochi's safety. Because they believe that the ghosts will try and take him back with them so that he can sing for them forever, basically. So one of the priests and his acolyte write the text of the Heart of Sutra on his body to make him invisible to ghosts, but they forget to cover his ears. So the ghosts come to take him like they thought he would, but they can't see him because of the writing. All they can see are his ears. So they rip his ears off, and which is probably the most bloody moment in the movie, and take them back to the underworld with them. The next morning, a full retinue of ghosts comes to Hochi, who plays the tale to them, despite his friends' warnings. He goes on to become a famous and wealthy musician. And you get the sense that he's not playing the music for his patrons, but he's playing it for the sad ghosts that he knows are around him. So the Heart of Sutra, which is painted on Hochi's body, is part of... I'm really gonna kill this. So it's part of the Prajnaparamita Sutra, which deals with the vital Buddhist concept of emptiness. One particular incantation, form is emptiness and emptiness is form. Form is not different from emptiness, and emptiness is not different from form, was believed to hold power over spirits, reminding them that they too are merely one aspect of the unreality of the world. Hence why they chose this particular passage to cover Hochi's body.
Okay.
So the very last one, I'm almost done, guys, I promise.
No, it's okay.
The very last one is the shortest. So it's called In a Cup of Tea. Japanese is Chawan no Naka. So anticipating a visit from his publisher, an author relates an old tale of an attendant of Lord Nakagawa Sadano named Sakani. Sakenai. When Lord Nakagawa is on his way to make a New Year's visit, he and his party stop at a tea house. While dining there, Sekenai sees a strange face in a cup of tea. So for whatever reason, even though he's like totally disturbed, he drinks the tea anyway. I don't know. I probably wouldn't. And when I say sees a face, it's like a floating face in the tea. It's not like the tea leaves are making the face.
Oh my God.
It's like
that's gross.
Someone's face in the tea. So later that night, while Sekenai is guarding the Lord, the man whose face was in the tea appears and introduces himself. Sekenai runs to tell the other attendants, but they laugh and tell him that he's seeing things. Later that night in his own room, Sekenai is visited by 3 ghostly attendants of the man from the teacup. He duels them and is nearly defeated. We last see Sekenai, his sanity crumbling, laughing hysterically as the men close in on him again. We then return to the author's room, but the author is not there, though he continues to narrate the story. Shortly afterwards, the author's publisher calls upon him but cannot find him. He questions the author's wife, who insists that her husband must be somewhere in the house. When they cannot find him, she asks the publisher to wait. She then begins making tea while the publisher looks over the author's work, including an unfinished story about a guard who is plagued by a reflection, obviously the story that we've just seen. Rather than provide an explanation himself, notes the author, he leaves it to the reader to think of an ending that will satisfy his imagination, to decide the likely consequence of swallowing a soul. Suddenly, the author's wife screams, hurling to the floor her teapot as she scrambles away from the cauldron of hot water in the middle of the room. The publisher advances cautiously, glancing down into the water, and then he, too, backs away in terror, hurling the author's unfinished manuscript to the ground. And that's how the movie ends. So, In a Cup of Tea is obviously unfinished on purpose, right? So it basically just kind of brings together the entire movie, this idea of this is just a movie, these are just stories, but stories can have real world consequences, right? He writes a story about a man swallowing a soul from a cup of tea, and then we are left to presume that what his wife and the publisher see in the cauldron is his face, right?
Right. So, yeah, I
yes.
love that.
Yes.
I love that a lot.
Yeah, it's so good. It's so good. So, the movie as a whole, so, it mostly deals with the intrusion, of ghosts and the ghostly realm into the world of reality. It kind of suggests that there's a reason that the two worlds need to be kept apart, right? I mean, in the first 3 stories, interaction with anything from the ghostly world ends in, like, bad things for our protagonist, right? The first guy ages rapidly and then is attacked by his ex-wife's hair. You know, the one guy is literally eaten by the Yuki-onna in that segment. Though, I mean, she, like, eats him and consumes him, but then they find his body and he looks like he's just fallen asleep. But he's drained of blood. But they're not vampires. I don't really know how it works.
It's really interesting.
Yeah. And then Hochi is severely affected by his nightly visits to the graveyard. He grows pale, ill, and exhausted for reasons that have nothing to do with his lack of sleep. But it's because the spirits of the dead are consuming the most vital part of him. But then you also have to look at the fact that, sorry, I have these notes kind of scattered. The contact with the living is not necessarily a good thing for the ghosts, right?
Yeah.
In both The Woman of the Snow and Hochi the Earless, are about the main characters making a promise to these spirits and then ultimately breaking it, right?
Sure.
And
not to mention the swallowing of the soul thing. Obviously, that's a bad... Or, I mean, it's really metaphorical, but it's like a bad interaction between humans and spirits.
Exactly.
Humans consuming a spirit.
Exactly. And then the first wife of the samurai, she's not killed by starvation or anything like that, but by her husband's betrayal. Which then, as a spirit, she can't rest because she died in this state of abandonment, right?
Yeah, so the whole reason that she's a ghost is
exactly.
Okay.
Basically, the point of this whole movie is that we're constantly surrounded by this spirit world, and we're haunted by not only by ghosts, but by our past, right? All of these stories have to have something to do with the past, and the black hair, his idea of marrying the second wife and being wealthy and raising his social status is ruined by the memory of his first wife and their life together. In the second story, Minokichi is only able to find earthly happiness when he forgets about his encounter with the ghost. When he remembers, his happiness goes away, right? Because his wife leaves. And even in A Cup of Tea, there's so I didn't quite get into this, but the man whose face he sees repeats his name over and over and over to the guard, and it's almost like he's willing him to recognize him and remember him. So the point of the movie is basically the way that the past influences the present, and no matter how much we try to be free of the spirits and free of the past, we will never actually be free because they will cling to you forever.
I love how there's a clear delineation between the human and the spirit world, and like you're talking about the distance, like the need to keep a distance between them, but when it all comes down to it, it's just humans doing things to other humans. That's it. It doesn't matter that one's a ghost, one's not.
Exactly.
One was and then wasn't, or wasn't and then was. So.
Right, exactly. And it, and I like that, not only, because, mostly in horror movies, you see how people being haunted by ghosts are bad. But in this movie, you also see that, it kind of sucks for the ghosts, too.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily loving it.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, especially in Hochi the Earless, they're abandoned by him, right? That's why they have to rip off his ears, because that's the only part they can get. They're so desperate to have a piece of their former life, of the human world, that they're resorted to ripping his ears off.
I'm gonna have to watch this movie because there's
so
a lot in it.
And
there's a lot in these stories and the way they tie together.
The visuals in this movie, I didn't even get into. They are astounding. I mean, the way that he uses light and color and shadows to really add another element to the story. Oh my god, it's so beautiful.
So are these retellings of folk tales, or are they stories that use elements of folk tales to tell different stories?
So I think they're stories that use elements of folk tales. I have never read the book. So, okay, so this is not, they're not all based on that one book by this guy. One of them is, so The Black Hair was adapted from The Reconciliation, which is in Shadowings by Hearn. Two of them are from Kwaidan, and then the last one is from Koto, Being Japanese Curios with Sundry Cobwebs. I've never read any of this gentleman's books. I kind of would like to.
I bought Paul one of them, so we have one around here somewhere.
Really?
But I have not read it. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Just came into the book rack one day, like it does.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he says in the introduction, the author, most of these stories were translated from old Japanese texts. He also states that one of the stories, The Woman of the Snow, was told to him by a farmer in Musashi province. And his was apparently the first record of it, both by his own account and according to the research of modern folklorists.
Okay, this is all coming back to me now, because I cataloged this guy. And I read a little bit about him, and he was, like, obsessed with... I don't think he wasn't Japanese, but he was obsessed with Japanese culture. And he wrote several books about Japanese folklore.
He was Greek.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, he was Greek.
Yeah, okay, now, yep, okay. I've got it.
But he, like... So he was born in Greek to a Greek mother and an Irish father. A complex series of conflicts and events led to him being moved to Ireland, where he was abandoned first by his mother, leaving him in the care of her husband's aunt, then by his father, and finally by his father's aunt, who had been appointed his official guardian. Jesus. So at 19, he was put on a boat to the United States, and he lived in Cincinnati, then in New Orleans. And from there, he was sent as a newspaper correspondent, first to the French West Indies, where he stayed for 2 years, and then to Japan, where he would remain for the rest of his life. In Japan, he married a Japanese woman with whom he had 4 children, and became a naturalized Japanese citizen. His writings about Japan offered the Western world a glimpse into a largely unknown but fascinating culture. Yeah. So this was basically how we started to become familiar with these stories.
What time period was he alive? I know he was kind of like early 20th century, right? To mid?
No, very late 18th century. He lived 1850 to 1904.
Oh, late 19th century.
Yeah, so he died young. I mean, he was only 54 when he died.
Huh.
In the late 19th century, Japan was still largely unknown and exotic to Westerners. However, with the introduction of Japanese aesthetics, particularly at the Paris Exposition of 1900, Japanese styles became fashionable in Western countries. Consequently, Hearn became known to the world by his writings concerning Japan. In later years, some critics would accuse Hearn of exoticizing Japan, but because he offered the West some of its first descriptions of pre-industrial and Meiji-era Japan, his work is almost universally regarded as having historical value. So yeah, it's very interesting. You know, how this guy sort of skipped around and ended up in Japan. And I mean, obviously these stories must be well regarded in Japan if 60 years later they would choose to make a movie out of them, right? So yeah, this is a really good movie. People should watch more older Japanese movies. They're really, really good. And they did some really creative stuff.
All right, so mine, it's fairly short. It's going to be fairly short. I chose Dead Snow, which is not a very profound movie, but it is interesting. I would say definitely give it a watch. It's a 2009 horror comedy, and it basically packs in like all the tropes you can think of. Like, this group of medical students go to a cabin in the mountains, and then they're besieged by Nazi zombies looking for stolen Nazi treasure. And old. And did you get to watch this, Rachel?
No, I didn't, unfortunately, but I would love
to,
because that sounds amazing.
And it's very, very gory. So if you are not having a good stomach day, I would not watch it. It is so gory. Another trope, old stranger warns them, but they pay no attention. So I'm not going to really go over the plot, because it's basically what you just heard is what you get. And it's, a lot of zombies killing and eating people, and a lot of people killing Nazi zombies. And yeah, that's what it is. But it's really interesting because these aren't just zombies. They're a combination of pop culture zombies and Norse mythical beings known as a... Dang it, what is with all these words I can't pronounce? A drog. A drog. D-R-A-U-G. Yeah.
Draugr. They're in Skyrim.
Sure.
That's the only reason I know that.
Sure. Anyway, the term drog means again walker. So they're like zombies, but they contain some specifics that are relevant to this film. Usually, a drog is a man who was greedy in life, and of course, the process of the greed is infectious. So there's an element of selfishness, which this article I found said is an important attribute of every ghost. Interesting. I don't know. Is it? But I was trying to go down, like, the winter horror route here, and I basically went into, like, Nazis in horror territory, so this episode's gonna be really random. Because we had the, like, one with the snow in it, but mostly it was just Japanese folklore, and now it's just Nazi zombies, and then maybe Miranda stuck to the theme, who knows?
Mine is 100% winter horror. It couldn't be any more winter horror if it tried, so don't worry, awesome. I'm the anchor.
They're in the mountains, it's snowy, all you see is snow, blood looks really good on the snow, perfect colors, yeah, anyway, but it doesn't, I don't know if it has anything to do with, like, the actual story. Anyway, I found this article called Horror History in the Third Reich, Locating Traumatic Pasts in Hollywood Horrors by Christiane Marie Abusera, from the book The Horrors of Trauma in Cinema, which is free on Google Books if you want to download it as a PDF. It looks really interesting. I haven't read the whole thing yet. There's a lot of good essays in it. Anyway, this author is a huge supporter of horror movies as not only good but often better ways into national trauma, specifically because horror films often employ national elements, she says. That is, like, whatever country the film is from, you tend to get more of, like, the who we think we are, who we wish we would have been or could have been, and who we might become from that movie. And the genre is also particularly good for looking into collective trauma, for obvious reasons, I think. Anyway, she's kind of zooming in on this. So you might be thinking that it's, like, fairly obvious why we use Nazis in horror movies, but there, according to her, is a little more underneath that. So she invites us to read using something called thick description, which you might have heard before, especially Miranda in, like, English studies. I've heard it somewhere, so it was kind of familiar to me. But it basically means that we'll be traveling beyond the one-to-one allegory for evil and depravity that Nazis represent in film. So, like, yeah, duh, Nazis are bad. At least into the psychological reasons that we use Nazis specifically for this symbolism. So what I love is that she wants to separate the actual historical events from the way these events are dissected and used in the film. So, like, more... It says more about us and our attitudes towards it than it does about the actual thing, if that makes sense. So her claim is this. This is a quote. The Nazi figure in American horror film simultaneously fulfills two roles in the traumatic cycle. The role of traumatic image, wherein the collective narrative concerning World War II is reenacted and reinforced, and the role of an open signifier, whereby new historical traumas that have not yet been fully assimilated into the national narrative are encoded. So, I think that's, like, pretty straightforward, but basically, stuff we haven't digested and stuff we have digested, kind of, is hard to. So, like, our perspective on the historical event and then what we're still working through. So she says it's not really the physical deformities and not really the Nazi iconography that make Nazis horrific. It's their abuse of science and their interest in science's link to the occult, as well as their utilitarian use of the human body. So in Dead Snow, if we were to apply that to Dead Snow, it's weird because we don't know how they became zombies. They just kind of said there is this especially egregious troop of Nazis, like the real bad guys, who, like, disappeared looking for this treasure and came back as these zombies. So either it was a folklore thing or, like, an act of sheer stubborn willpower of, like, we're never gonna die. So that might be how it's applied, but she talks about other movies that do apply this, and it makes sense when she talks about those. I can't remember which one she did because it's been like a month since I read this article. I barely understood it when I took these notes. So she says which I think this is also fairly obvious. I don't know why she had to point this out, but it's their actions and attitudes that make them frightening. It's not their appearance. It's not the Nazi iconography. They're socially deviant, but they're also kind of reflecting something that other cultures have a problem with, which is going too far with science. So it's not like a one-to-one comparison or a simple, like, placement of blame. And she goes on to cite this sociologist named Ron Eierman, who knows, who looks at the processing of trauma in something called a trauma loop. This loop is represented by representation. In this case, America as the victim of a tragedy, images, Nazi science as presented in horror films, and a precipitating event, Nazi scientific experiments. But Nazis can also be used as an allegory, and it gets like a little weirder here. Ehrman states that trauma involves a crisis of national identity. And this second trauma loop needs to be repeated over and over again until the nation resolves its identity in relation to the specific traumatic event. So Nazis are a stand-in for whatever the current trauma is, not just Nazism. They're separated from Germans as a whole and from historical context and become what is called a free-floating signifier that is applicable to any trauma, which I never thought about this before. That is so weird. Like, say the issue's something else. Well, we're just gonna, like, put Nazis in there and have the Nazis stand for that. Although, nowadays, this article was written way before the Trump administration. So... Before they all started coming back out of the woodwork?
Yeah.
I guess. I don't know. There's not a lot of free-floating signifiers when the Nazis are... when it comes to the Nazis nowadays. It's like... Nazis are Nazis, or the Nazis we have, like, now.
Right.
So,
interesting.
But she says the reason that we do this is because it's actually safer for us to process. We don't have to, like, directly look at what's going on. And, like, because everybody well, and this is sad, everybody knows that Nazis are the bad guys, right?
Oh my god.
So it's easy,
you know?
Like, you would think so.
I would say the majority of people know that.
I would freaking
Even though it seems like it's not the majority sometimes, I think the majority of people do know that.
I feel like people know Nazis are bad on a surface level, but not at a deeper level. Because I feel like we have this understanding of Nazis are bad, but then people can't seem to connect, like, racism and white nationalism with Nazis.
Yeah.
And that's, like, infuriating to me that people can sit there and be like, Nazis are bad, but then they can, like, be 100% like a white nationalist. So I feel like there's some kind of disconnect.
Stupid.
I wonder, now, okay, my question about this is, so do we still do this? Do we still, like, post-Trump administration, do we still use the Nazi as a free-floating signifier in a horror movie? Or is it more of a, like, Nazis stand for our white nationalists, which basically can be this same thing?
I don't know. You know, I have to say that, and this is prior to Trump becoming president and all of these people crawling back out of the woodwork. You know, I think on one hand, a lot of people were really in denial that these kind of people were still around. You know, when they thought of the KKK, they're like, oh yeah, it's some guy in the South in a trailer park with no teeth who's married to his sister and weighs like 500 pounds, right? Like, that's what everybody pictured, but, you know, these people were still around. But then on the other hand, I think that people... again, this is prior to the Trump administration, were very quick to compare things to the Nazis where it was not an apt comparison.
So now when it's used, it
almost felt
kind
like
of
cheapened
weaker.
it a little bit.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense.
Yeah, just because, like, you know, what so-and-so is doing is really awful, you know, but it can be awful in its own right. You don't have to compare it to the Nazis and the Holocaust.
Yeah.
Well, and I think our generation is especially known for hyperbole when we're talking. Like, we'll say something is the worst ever, or, you know,
Right.
and we don't mean that, or we'll say, like, I had literally thousands of, yeah, I don't know. We'll say shit that doesn't make sense. That is, like,
Right.
way over the top. So when we go to say, this person is a Nazi, it kind of sounds, like you said, it cheapens it.
Yeah,
It does. It does. You know, and I mean, but I don't know. I don't know how, because I mean, we're getting to the point where, like, we're the last generation to coexist with survivors of the Holocaust. People who are old enough to remember it, I guess I should say. People who were not babies when it was happening. And so I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen in the future with the Nazis. If they're going to stop being this kind of, like, looming specter, if it's going to move on to something else finally, or if it's just going to continue.
I think it's going to depend entirely on what education starts to do, because I remember when I was I remember when I was in junior high, I felt like those 2 years that I was in middle school, all I was taught, all I really remember is stuff about the Holocaust, because it felt constant. Like, everything was about the Holocaust. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying, like, for me growing up, it was like you had to know, like, everything about the Holocaust.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's going to continue. You know, it's like, unfortunately, tragedies have an ebb and flow in society, and I don't know. I mean, there's a chance that, you know, one day something is going to surpass it, and that's what they're going to start teaching in school.
That's
not
true. Trying
to be negative, but
right. I mean, you know, you just don't know. Possible. And some of it, I think, depends on where you live. I mean, in America, we were obviously much more affected by World War II than we were by World War I, right? So we learned almost nothing about World War I. Whereas if you go over to, like, the UK, they learn about both because they were hugely affected by both World War I and World War II.
Yeah.
Dead Snow is not an American film, which I neglected to say. It's Norwegian.
Oh, my people!
So that might affect the depiction. I mean, I would assume they were a lot closer to all the terrible shit happening.
I don't think he ever got up that far.
Did he? Okay, I don't know.
I'm Googling
I don't know.
it. Norway.
Maybe. Ooh, that's interesting. Because I liked this article. I thought it was valid, but at the same time, I couldn't quite get it to overlap with the movie that I saw. Because it felt a little more flippant than...
Oh, you know what? They sure did. They sure did make it up that far.
I don't know. I couldn't... At sometimes it felt flippant. At sometimes it felt personal.
Well, so...
It's hard to explain.
Here's the thing with this movie. Like, I didn't see it, but I remember when it came out. So, I don't know. Did you guys ever play, like, Nazi zombies on Call of Duty Black Ops?
No. I'm not a video game person.
That was a huge thing when I was in, like, 6th grade. And it was a big deal for a little while. So 2009, I think I would have been in middle school. I feel like that movie was riding on the whole Nazi zombies and Call of Duty thing. Because it was, like, it was a big deal when I was a kid. And I think when that movie came out, that's kind of what they were riding on.
Yeah,
that
makes sense.
Like, that's how it felt to me. And I think that was kind of the understanding, was it was kind of like on that path. And obviously, like, Nazi zombies in Call of Duty is not something, you know, that you write an essay about. It's just it is what it is. Yeah. So,
but this film is really weird because the tone is hard to place. Like, I would call it a B movie and a comedy, but at the same time, it has some, like, it just sticks with you. For me, I guess I can only speak for myself. It really, like, it's creepy. It's really scary, and it's atmospheric. At the same time that it's ridiculous and funny and just a gross out, you know? Mm. And so the tone thing was part of what I had trouble with, was, like, it's not... They're not doing this big metaphorical that's not what this movie is, but also it's not just a straight comedy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's something weird going on. I don't know. So I remain perplexed by Dead Snow.
Yeah,
I think you should watch it. It's good.
Yeah, I really would like to see it. And they only made it for $800,000.
Yeah, it was a really low budget movie. I promise you probably won't have seen anything like it.
I mean, it certainly sounds like it. Sounds like one of a kind. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I also don't. Well, see, but I can't. I'm not a member of a group who was directly affected by Well, I am, but my relatives left before World War II. They left Poland, so they got out. So, I don't know. I mean, I feel like there are people who would hate this movie automatically because it's using the Nazis in comedy. But then I would say those people should probably watch The Producers by Mel Brooks. Who
Nazis on Ice.
No, Springtime for Hitler.
Springtime, whatever it is.
Yeah, it's hysterical. And then when he won, when they turned it into a musical on Broadway and he won a bunch of Tonys, and when they won Best Musical, he went up there with a little comb and he held it up under his nose and he said he wanted to thank Hitler for being such a funny guy.
Oh my god.
Oh my god.
But Mel Brooks is Jewish. And this is how he processes what happened.
He's talked about it a lot.
Well, and what he said is, for him, the ultimate way to take away somebody's power is to laugh at them. And Hitler, who wanted to be seen as this tough, you know, like, oh my god, ultimate leader, you turn him into a fucking joke.
It's like the controversy surrounding a more modern thing, controversy surrounding the serial killers with flower crowns pictures. People got mad at that, but like that was the whole thing. Was it's supposed to take away their power,
right? Only some people, I think, you know, this is a little off topic, but some people I think do cross the line.
Well, yeah, there's that.
Like I have certainly seen posts on like. Back before they shut down the main My Favorite Murder group, there were certainly posts of people like, I mean, it was like creepy. Like they almost had like hero worship kind of for these guys, right?
I didn't see that. I saw a whole lot
some
of
of
other
it
things.
was mostly
I'm
in
so
the
glad that group
comments.
is
Sometimes
gone.
I'd click
It's a
through and
shit
just
show.
be like, this is a disaster.
It was a disaster. It was hard to watch.
Yeah, but anyway.
Yeah, I don't know that I've heard anyone who like was angry about. I guess I didn't think to look up the way it was received.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's certainly not a new thing, like Nazi zombies and just so.
I guess I just meant more like using it in a
more comedic way.
Yeah, a more comedic way. Because I mean, like speaking of Mel Brooks, I just looked it up. So he served in World War II, and I mean, so he's obviously old.
How old is Mel Brooks?
93.
Oh,
he's old. Yeah,
God,
he's a year older than my grandma. But in any case, so that's, I mean, that's one of the ways that he processed it, you know, was making it into a joke. And so maybe, because as I just learned, the Nazis did make it up to Norway and did take over Norway, maybe that's a way for them to kind of cope with the history of what happened. You know, because of course several of their people were tried and executed as collaborators. So maybe that's a way for them to kind of process what happened, is making it into a comedy, a horror comedy, you know?
Yeah, I can definitely see that.
That's so interesting. See, your movie did have meaning to it.
It did. Yeah, you should totally watch it.
I want to watch it. Is it streaming?
Yes, it is. And where did I watch it? Netflix? It's on either Hulu, Netflix, or Prime.
Okay.
You want to be on Netflix.
3 that I use.
Yeah, I thought that I had
dropped
seen
on
it on
Netflix.
Netflix before, so I will check it out.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll watch it this
Oh,
weekend.
wait. Maybe I did have to rent that one. I thought I had to rent it off of Prime, but it was like $3.99. You can check it out from the library, I'm sure. It'll be a good one for January.
There you go. We're supposed to have horrible weather on Friday night.
Yeah,
so
that's what I heard.
maybe that's what I'll do Friday night when we're snowed in, is watch this, like, zombie horror comedy, Nazi zombie horror comedy. Just lay in my bed under,
good.
like, 5 blankets.
Just don't eat. Don't eat while you watch it.
Oh, see, that kind of stuff doesn't bother me.
Oh, never mind.
No.
No, it bothers me. I get really sick.
No,
Like,
that kind
I
of
don't
stuff
know
doesn't
why.
bother
As I
me.
get older, I get...
I'm just kind of, I will
screaming.
watch it and be like, that's gross. But it doesn't make me, like, physically ill. No.
Anyway, Miranda, take us back home to what we were here to originally talk about.
Miranda stayed on theme. Look at her go.
Yeah, so I basically chose, like, the most winter horror movie I feel like you could pick. I chose the movie Frozen, which came out in 2010. This movie came out before the animated Frozen, and so
That's not
like
what she is referring to.
Yes.
If you had picked the animated Frozen, though, I absolutely would have backed you up.
Yup.
Yes. But it was, like, frustrating to me and, like, other horror fans who loved this movie to hear people, like we would talk about Frozen, and then people would be like, oh my god, Anna and Elsa. I'd be like, no. The people who got trapped on a, like, ski lift.
Oh my god, no.
Oh, yes, I saw this film a long time ago.
Oh, that's like, oh no.
It's a good movie. It's a
I
great
have
movie.
a huge fear of heights, and
Okay.
I don't know if I could watch it. That sounds terrifying.
Don't know if you can either then. It's yeah, it's freaky.
It is.
So Frozen was directed by Adam Green. It has these 3 characters, Parker, Dan, and Lynch. They all go on a ski/snowboard trip together. So they didn't want to pay for tickets, so they planned to persuade one of the women who are, like, controlling the lift to let them onto the lift for $50 instead. But then, like, a man walks up, and they're kind of like, okay, what are we supposed to do now? So then they force Parker, who is dating, I believe, Dan. It's been about a month since I've seen this movie.
Is Parker a girl?
Yes, she is. Sorry.
Okay. That's okay.
So, yeah, they force Parker to flirt with them so they can get onto the mountain to ski, even though she really doesn't want to. She basically feels like she has to. So Lynch expresses annoyance that Parker is even there. Like, while she's over there flirting with this guy, he's, like, complaining to Dan that she's there because he says she's ruining the boys' trip. And then he starts bugging Dan about never being around anymore because of Parker, blah, 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 blah. So then, of course, Parker gets him in, and they start skiing and whatnot. So then the mountain closes early because there's a storm on its way. And the group comes down from the ski lift, and the guy's standing there, and they're like, please let us go up one more time. And he's like, well, I can't. Like, the mountain's closing. There's a storm. And they're like, please let us go. So he lets him go up one more time. Well, his shift ends, and another guy comes in. He, like, I can't remember if he, like, neglects to tell the guy that there's somebody there, or if the guy just doesn't care. I really don't remember. So they shut the resort down. Turn off all the power, all that kind of fun stuff. So then the 3 are then hanging from the lift. And then it starts snowing.
Nope.
Yep. And I forgot about this. And I put it, like, in exclamation points. Special guest appearance from Kane Hodder. Ha! He drives beneath them in, like, a snowcat or whatever, but he doesn't see them, even though they throw stuff at his car. He's, like, turned around backing up, and they throw stuff at the window, and he doesn't see it or hear them. He backs out. He's gone. Just a fun little, guest appearance.
Yeah.
I was watching, and I was like, oh my god! It's Kane Hodder! Because I don't think I knew who he was when I first watched this movie. So then, of course, the 3 of them, they're sitting there. They have to talk about the 3 scariest, they talk about the scariest ways to die. Because why wouldn't you?
Okay.
How about trapped on a ski lift in the middle of nowhere?
Like, no, you need to talk about happy things and try and be positive.
Yep. So, Dan says that the scariest way to die for him would be to be eaten by a shark. But not, like, when you're eaten from beneath and you don't even, like, realize it. It's, like, the stalking part that scares him. He says that part is, like,
worse than death. Just like knowing the shark is coming for you and not being able to do anything. And then Parker says burning would be the worst way to die. She cites 9/11 and how it terrified her that people were willing to jump because it was that bad in the buildings. And then Lynch says the Sarlacc pit in Star Wars. I had to look this up because I'm not a Star Wars fan.
Slowly digest it over.
That's what Boba Fett goes into.
So, yes. So, according to Wikipedia, all of our listeners are probably cringing so hard. Victims were injected with immobilizing neurotoxins that caused constant pain, and then they were digested over time while still alive. That sounds horrifying.
By the way, I think it's like 1,000 years, too.
Yeah, it goes on forever.
Not like
ever.
over a week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he won. I think that's the worst way to die. Okay, so after this whole conversation, the crew starts to develop frostbite after only a few hours. It's that cold, and the storm is that bad. So, guess what? Dan decides that he's gonna jump off the ski lift.
Yes!
So,
I remember this.
He jumps in, like, the only, like, the worst way he possibly can, with his legs fucking buckled under him. So he falls feet down and both of his legs break. And he is just sitting there.
No shit.
Yeah, he's just sitting there screaming. And then you hear the wolves. And the wolves come. And Parker has to throw her snowboard at one of them to keep it from trying to eat Dan. So then Lynch starts to notice that Parker's frostbite is getting worse. So then he decides that he's going to try to grab the cable that's holding the ski lift up, and, like, kind of move across it. I don't know how to explain it. Like,
okay, yeah.
Like, just hands back and forth. I don't know how to explain it. To a ladder, because there's a ladder, a ways down attached to a pole. So he tries to do it, but then the cable cuts into his hands after, like, a few movements or whatever.
Yeah, what a dumbass. No shit that was gonna happen.
Doesn't he have gloves on?
He does, but it cuts through the gloves.
Ooh, shit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So then, of course, the wolves finally attack Dan and they eat him alive, and Lynch covers Parker's face along with his own. So basically all they hear is the sounds of Dan being eaten, because it's a silent mountain, so that's what they get to listen to. So then Parker and Lynch basically release their grief and anger on each other. Parker blames him for not stopping Dan, and then she kind of says, oh, it should have been you and not him. And then Lynch blames Parker and says if it weren't for them having to stay on the bunny hill, they would have gotten runs in and wouldn't have had to come back. They apologize and they make up. They just kind of take their anger out on each other. Mm-hmm. So time passes, the snow is continuing, and Dan's body is now, like, completely covered. You can't even see it. They kind of, like, joke around. It starts to get kind of depressing because they're just accepting the fact that they're gonna die. Like, I laugh at this movie, but there are actually some really good moments with the characters trying to come to terms with the fact that, like, they have no chance of surviving. Because, like, this is basically a no-win scenario. I mean, this is a movie, so things are going to be different. But in real life, I don't know if this has ever happened, but I can't imagine anyone surviving it. So, they joke about stuff that's happened and talk about, like, how they're going to get married and have kids and have, like, Lynch says he's going to have a dog named Steve. And then Parker gets really upset because she realizes that her puppy that she has at home isn't going to understand why she isn't coming home to feed her.
Oh my god, no! Yeah. What the hell?
She worries that she's going to starve to death waiting for her, and then Lynch kind of reassures her the neighbors will kick the door down because they're going to get sick of the dog barking. So he kind of, like, makes a joke out of it to cheer her up. So yeah, it gets kind of sad for a little bit. But time passes again, and Parker falls asleep with her bare hand on the metal safety bar.
Oh no.
And we get to see her rip her skin off to remove it. Her face is practically covered in ice, and her frostbite looks like it's an open wound at this point.
Yeah. You do not fall asleep if you were in that situation.
No.
There are people who have survived solely because they kept themselves awake.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Just, oh, God.
Yep. So, she pees herself.
Mm-hmm.
And then has a breakdown because when they get to the mountain, she's like, I gotta go to the bathroom, and they're like, okay, let's go, and she's like, nah, it's fine, I'll wait. And she didn't have a choice, but she has a bit of a breakdown, and then she like wipes her frostbite because it itches, and she like rips part of her face off.
Yeah,
and now it's like definitely like a full-blown open wound at this point. But yeah, like I said, a lot of the movie is just watching two people try to deal with the fact that they're going to die. They talk about pretty much everything that has to do with, life and all that kind of stuff. So Lynch finally accepts that they're gonna die, so he takes another chance and he tries the cable again. But when he does, a screw falls out and the chair is tilted and it nearly falls.
Nope.
So, like, so Parker's, like, hanging there kind of sideways, and Lynch is up on the cable kind of shimmying along. So we then start to see the wolves come together, and they're underneath Lynch. They're, like, watching him. They're, like, following him on this, underneath him. They're waiting for him to fall, but he doesn't. He makes it to the ladder, and he climbs down, but then the wolves are after him, and his hands are bloodied, so they're not going to give up. Parker throws a ski pole, and he uses it to fend off the wolves. He rides a snowboard down the hill, and the last thing Parker sees is him riding down with the wolves chasing after him. Because he was supposed to, like, get out and get help and stuff like that. After he doesn't return for a long period of time, she decides she's going to jump down. But then when this happens, she gets lucky and the lift starts to fall on its own. And it falls several feet above the ground. So she lets go and the lift... Well, she lets go, so she doesn't have a long fall, but then the lift falls on her leg and her foot. So then she has to kind of hobble down the mountain. And she finds Lynch's body half-eaten, and the wolves there eating his body. She makes it out of the resort and lays down on the road, and a man stops to help her. In the last moments of the movie, Parker is sitting in the car staring at her reflection while the man keeps telling her everything is going to be okay. And then we hear Dan's voice saying, "You're going to be okay, baby." And then the movie ends.
Wow. That sounds like a downer.
It's a sad movie. It's a really sad movie.
Those poor wolves were totally demonized in that movie.
Yeah, I feel like it's really unrealistic that they would do that to a live person. But,
God, no.
Yeah.
Or they would do it to, like... They might do it to an injured person who couldn't move, but not to someone who, like...
was snowboarding down the mountain?
Yeah, no, I don't think so.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I love this movie. I was really scared that when I rewatched it, I was gonna hate it, just because it was 10 years ago that I watched this movie. I was 12, so I was like, how good can it actually be? I was 12,
right?
But it's actually
decent.
It's better than I remember it being, actually. So it does a really good job of depicting characters who have to deal with looming death and having to decide whether or not to even try. I mean, that's kind of the question of it all, is like, is it even worth the effort? Because all of them kind of know is it even gonna work? Probably not. You know?
I love stories like this.
Yeah.
I watched this show called I Shouldn't Be Alive.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
like, it has a happy ending because you know they made it out, but it's like shit like this. Like, you wouldn't fucking believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's insane.
It's crazy. But yeah, like I said, like, the movie has more emotional scenes, I think, than it does horrific or, like, really gory scenes. But this movie is gory. I enjoy the gore in this movie. But, like, the reliance on the emotional stuff just adds to the horror of the movie, because you have characters who are so fleshed out that you feel connected to them, and you want so badly for them to win, and you want so badly for them to get off of that ski lift.
Yeah.
But you still know, like, part of you knows, like, it's not going to happen. Even though Parker makes it out, you don't believe anyone's going to get out. You know, and they talk about things that, like, most people wouldn't think about. Like the puppy, the part with the puppy where she's, like, upset that, like, nobody's gonna feed my puppy's gonna die. Like, that is so sad, and nobody ever thinks about that. That's not something that you would, I don't know, that's not something I think I would ever think of when I was making a movie. I don't know. But that's sad.
Like, Yeah. Once you bring an animal into it, it's like, that's just mean.
The puppy didn't die.
But like, it makes me
She made it home to feed her puppy.
It makes me think of the absolute worst episode of TV that makes me sob like no other, from Futurama, where... Have you guys watched Futurama?
No, but I vaguely remember something about a puppy.
Yeah, so the main character, Fry, he goes into this pizza joint and he gets transported into the future, right? So in this one episode, he goes to this museum and he finds, I don't know, like the DNA or something of his dog. And he's going to resurrect the dog. He's going to have the scientist resurrect the dog. But then he decides not to because he says, after I left, he was such a good dog. I'm sure he was adopted by another family and he had a great life. And I don't want to take that away by bringing him back, right? Mm-hmm. And then we fucking flash back and see Fry leaving his dog outside the pizza place. And he's like, okay, I'll be right back, buddy. And he goes in. And we know he never comes back out. And the fucking dog stays there for years until it lays down and dies.
God.
Waiting for him. No. Oh my God. I'm about to cry right now. I can see a
How is that
GIF.
possible? Didn't someone come
No,
by?
like the pizza owner fed it. The owner of the pizza place would feed it.
It just stays there.
But the dog wouldn't leave because he was waiting for his owner to come back and he never did. And then at the very end of the episode, he lays down and closes his eyes and you know that he died.
Oh.
Yep, I can see a GIF from that episode and start crying. Like, it's horrific, but that's exactly when you brought up that puppy. That is exactly what that reminded me of.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's... Like, sometimes I feel like when you bring animals into a movie, it feels like a really cheap shot. But I felt like this was not a cheap shot.
Oh, yeah, no. And it does
like
not feel like a cheap shot in Futurama either.
Yeah.
No, that didn't seem like a cheap shot to me. Yeah. I mean, that seems like a real thing that I could see someone thinking about, because in situations like that, you think of things that maybe to the outside world seem inconsequential, but when you're in shock and you're going through this kind of thing, you like fixate on things like that.
Right.
So I think that's pretty realistic that she would think that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That sounds like I'm gonna have to, I just looked it up. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna have to, I've never seen anything that this guy directed, but I'm gonna have to find this one. Is this one streaming?
No, I think I had to get it on Amazon Prime. It used to be on Netflix.
Yeah, when I saw it was on Netflix, but that was in 2013.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, but one other thing that I wanted to add that's like really cool about this movie is because it's on a mountain and it's covered in snow, it's extremely quiet. Like, before I watched this movie, I didn't even think about like what that kind of environment would be, but they take full advantage of that. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, it'll be dead silent and then you hear something and you fucking hear something. Like, it is loud.
I love it when they know how to use that.
It's great. It's so great. And it's even like the smallest sounds, like just the noises that the lift makes, or the wind, the ice, the wolves, like everything is just amplified because the background is just like dead silent. It's great. Yeah. But that's everything I have to say about that movie. It's so good. I've always loved it. That sounds really good. Yeah. It's a good one.
That just made me realize that there absolutely was a winter horror movie that I absolutely loved that I could have done. But too late now. I guess next year, next winter. Oops.
That's okay. Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget you can follow us on Twitter at QOTD Podcast, on Facebook at facebook.com/QOTD Podcast, Tumblr at queensofthedamnpodcast.tumblr.com, and YouTube at Queens of the Damn Podcast.
Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes, Podbean, Stitcher, YouTube, Google Play, and TuneIn Radio. You can also follow us on our blog, queensofthedamnpodcast.wordpress.com, to find bonus content and extra information on our episodes.
If you would like to donate to our show, you can find us at patreon.com/QOTD podcast, where you can receive special perks as a listener for becoming a monthly patron. If you would like to make a one-time donation, you can send it to QOTDpodcast@gmail.com on PayPal. We'll see you next week.